What is up, everybody? Welcome inside the Guilty as Charged podcast. My name is Steven. I am the host, and joining me as always is my guy Tyler. Tyler, what's up, man? How you doing today?
Doing very well. Can't wait to talk about the edge rusher class. It's a good class. It's a great class, you could even say. So I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, this is definitely a group that I had, penciled in for an early episode, and the grades panned out. I think this is a great draft to really need a pass rusher, as the Chargers do. We'll talking about all of that, I'm sure, throughout the rest of the show, and probably the biggest question mark of any prospect I've probably graded over the last 4 years is certain prospects. So I'm excited to dive in there. First and foremost, we do have some news to get into today. Obviously, the Chargers, essentially mutually parting ways with Ronaldo Hill as defensive coordinator. Initially, the reporting was that they were simply going to promote Derek Ansley into the defensive coordinator spot, and also promote Tommy Donatel into the secondary coach, passing game coordinator role that Ansley currently holds for the Chargers. So that has not officially happened. It came out today that the Chargers have interviewed. I'm forgetting his first name. Is it Darren Covington, the defensive line coach from the Patriots? And then Luke Delk, the defensive coordinator from the University of Houston. So a little premature potentially on the reporting of Derek Ansley, but Tyler, what do you make of this whole thing? And Ronaldo Hill moving to Miami to take a demotion, essentially.
Yeah, so all the window dressing from Eddie Adam Schefter tweet can't hide the fact that this was a firing, and we knew that as is. Then it was confirmed as much. This was just a very polite way of saying that they were fired, and it's just like the classic movies and directors. Oh, there was a creative differences issue or a scheduling issue. Like, no, you're kind of fired off the project. So yeah, no Ronaldo Hill. People ask about Derek Ansley versus Ronaldo Hill. When they hired Ronaldo Hill, I thought, hey, that's great. He's going to work with the secondary. He's had experience in the secondary. He's worked with Justin Simmons in Denver. Denver's got a good secondary. They've had a good secondary for a while, and certainly while he was there. So if you had asked me 2 years ago, I'd say, yeah, Hill was a good hire. And I guess it didn't pan out. I would say overall, it does sound like Derek Ansley has been more of the guy, or at least the most important guy in that defensive. Well, I shouldn't say that because I feel like Jay Rodgers is as well. But,
Sure.
Derek Ansley is a big part of what they do in the secondary, whether that's the resurgence of some players, the ascension of some players, the sustained play of others. Maybe we won't talk about Nasir Adderley, but even you could use that against Derek Ansley. I would say that Nasir Adderley's best season has come under Derek Ansley. It just went downhill this past season. So
Sure.
I do think that is what ends up happening, that Ansley is the defensive coordinator and Donatel is promoted. I don't know where the second wave is coming from, but I'm inclined to believe that Ansley is the defensive coordinator. And great. Good for him. I've heard nothing but good things about him. You heard some specific things about him that I would happy for you to share. So yeah, I'm happy for this on the surface. I just don't know, like, now that that Staley has fired all three of his different coordinators.
Yeah.
You can really tell that this is like the season. And we knew that anyway. Obviously, if Staley did not make the playoffs, all the same reasons as last year or completely different reasons, who knows? But if they don't make the playoffs and if they don't, do anything meaningful in the postseason, and we're thinking AFC Championship or bust, this is it. There's nobody else to fire anymore. It would come down to a full, clean slate, a whole new thing, and build around Herbert a different way.
Yeah, so first a correction on my part. Patriots defensive line coach DeMarcus Covington, and then University of Houston defensive coordinator Doug Belk. So Belk is an interesting candidate to me. He came up essentially under Kirby Smart and Nick Saban at Alabama. Him and Derek Ansley actually were on the same staff at Alabama in 2016. So definitely some connections there. That's Brandon Staley loves picking from that kind of system, obviously, from a player standpoint and also from a coaching standpoint. So it's going to be interesting to see how this one pans out. But it does feel like obviously Tom Pelissero did kind of maybe jump the gun a little bit with the Ansley tweet. Like you, I do expect that ultimately to be the decision. Maybe there's some kind of backpedaling with Tommy Donatel. Maybe he kind of stays in his role, and maybe you hire Doug Pelk to be the secondary coach to replace Derek Ansley. So we'll see ultimately what happens there. But I in a vacuum, I really like this move. I think, from an outside looking in perspective, I think you can look at Derek Ansley's coaching resume as somebody who is more ready to be a defensive coordinator than what Ronaldo Hill has been. And like we talked about from a Doug Nussmeier standpoint, it's possible for these coaches to be really solid position coaches and kind of be overwhelmed by the coordinator, offensive coordinator kind of role. And I think that's also what's happened here with Ronaldo Hill. So I think if the Chargers had just hired him as a secondary coach, as a safety coach, whatever, I think that would have been a much better spot for him. But, the people that I talked to after the 2021 season and during last season all told me that Derek Ansley was kind of the biggest voice on the defensive coaching staff outside of Brandon Staley, that he was kind of the leader. He was the alpha male, and that Ronaldo Hill was, he knows his stuff. He knows how to break things down. I mean, he played in the NFL. Like, he's a good position coach. But everything that I heard was that Derek Ansley was like the glue of the defensive coaching staff. And so, promoting him, I am totally behind. I think he is a coach on the rise. Right after the 2021 season, he was listed in like the future head coach tree, that the articles that everybody writes, NFL Network, The Athletic. He is considered a rising star. And, Mario Cristobal wanted to hire him away after 2021 to be the defensive coordinator at the University of Miami. Like, he's had opportunities to leave the Chargers to go back to college and be a defensive coordinator, and obviously decided to stay in Los Angeles. And I think this is kind of the reason why. So I'm a big fan of Derek Ansley. I think everybody should be excited about this move. Unfortunately, Ronaldo Hill, it just didn't work out there. And like you said, this is a firing. It's just that Brandon Staley and Ronaldo Hill are really close. They didn't maybe want to frame it that way, that they're necessarily firing him. Of course, there could be some peddling from Ronaldo's side of things as well. But, losing 3 coordinators, I think it's an interesting trend from Brandon Staley. One of them already has been a major success in firing Darius Swinton and hiring Ryan Ficken. I would argue that, getting rid of Joe Lombardi and hire Kellen Moore is another great move. And this one is too. So, there's a lot of Brandon Staley takes to be had within this kind of structure and these moves. But I think the 3 moves individually in a vacuum are each solid decisions by Brandon Staley.
Yeah, 100%. Again, it's process over results. Maybe it doesn't work out, but I totally get why you'd make these particular moves. The Chargers, part of what they're criticized for under the Telesco era is that sunk cost fallacy, and continuing to invest and hold on and just hope this works out in year 3 and year 4. You could argue they're doing that with someone like a Kenneth Murray right now, but we'll see. But like last year with Jared Tillery, they could have forced that issue. Instead, they didn't. They were proactive after the draft to get someone. They drafted someone, they signed other guys, and they moved on. And I think with Brandon Staley, that is something that they are, I think, better at than years previous, especially maybe during the Lynn era where, guys, it was loyalty to a fault. I think you're seeing kind of 2 different sides of that. Whether it works or not, I don't know, but I at least can appreciate whether it works or not, that Brandon Staley can acknowledge when it's just not working. And so we need to make some sort of change, whether that's coordinators, whether that's benching Nasir Adderley, whether that's cutting Jerry Tillery. I can at least respect that he's able to go out and make those changes and frankly have the balls to go do that, because you could just like, I don't want to do it. I brought in Ronaldo Hill. That means that like I did something wrong and I, hired the wrong guy. But no, he's like, again, I think he kind of had to make some of these moves regardless, because that's part of the job. And, when you lose like you do in the playoffs, somebody has to go. But still, I can appreciate what Brandon Staley is trying to do here. Whether it pays off or not, I don't know. I will say Derek Ansley, it's such a minor thing. But in the first preseason game this past year against the Rams, they were struggling significantly against, getting too many defensive pass interference issues, holding, tackling, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so when I went to training camp the next day, all they were working on was turning your head around and tackling, which, I mean, sure, it's practice. You're supposed to do those things. I get it. But it's just a little thing like that makes me feel confident about something like this, that there was a clear, significant issue with tackling and turning your head around. So you work with Dean Leonard, you work with Jaw Taylor, you work with some of these guys, and you improve in that regard. And now you see during the season, granted they didn't play a whole lot of defense, but guys like Dean Leonard, guys like Jaw Taylor, guys like Raheem Lane were able to contribute significantly on special teams as defensive backs. So I'll give some credit to Ansley for that.
Yeah, and I think something else that you can really point to is, you mentioned Nasir Adderley and him being the starting free safety in 2021 and playing well, in my opinion. I thought he was a pretty solid player last year or 2 years ago at this point. And then pivoting towards the end of 2022 to Alohi Gilman as free safety, like that's a very drastic change in terms of like styles, in terms of ability.
Mm-hmm.
And they were able to do that seamlessly. Obviously, a lot of that is due to Alohi Gilman, being up for the task. But devising these plans to the point where Alohi Gilman can go out and cover Tyreek Hill on a wheel route and like do it well, and play and be like a crucial piece down the stretch. I think that's also something that Derek Ansley deserves credit for. So I am curious ultimately what this means from like a schematic standpoint, because there's some similarities between like the Alabama Kirby Smart, Nick Saban defense and like what Vic Fangio and that tree has kind of done. But at the same time, like you look at like from a position standpoint, right? Like we've been talking a lot about like Jaw Taylor being in the slot or like Asante Samuel junior being in the slot. Like the Alabama defense has always been like built around like these bigger like slot players, like Mark Webb. Like that's what we thought that he was going to be coming in and doing it as that sixth defensive back and playing in the slot. And then, you look at like Brian Branch in this year's draft. So like from a personnel standpoint, I'm curious what this means for the smaller players, particularly like Asante Samuel Jr. Just kind of adds another layer there. But the Brandon Staley stuff, I think it's again, like I think he's in a tough spot because he does hire these people, and obviously like you wish that that you don't have to fire coordinators. Like obviously you build the staff with the hopes that everybody kind of works out, and if they leave that that it's because they're getting promoted, not because they're getting demoted or fired. But I think Anthony Lynn is probably still the Chargers head coach if he had this kind of approach and willingness to fire his coordinators before it got too late. So there's some give and take here for sure. I think obviously you criticize him for not being able to build a staff up properly the first time.
Sure.
But also like he does deserve credit for being able to go out, make smarter moves, smarter hirings the second time around.
Yeah, I would agree. What do you think they're doing with the other two interviews then, if we think Ansley's the defensive coordinator?
Yeah, so some people obviously pointed out like what Daniel Popper said to us, to me and Alex, a couple of weeks ago, that Telesco does like to bring in candidates who like the Chargers are playing, and obviously the Chargers do play the Patriots this year. Although I don't really know like what kind of intel you're going to get about the Patriots at this point that everybody doesn't already know. But the defensive coordinator from Houston, I think, is really interesting to me because he's got a very similar background to Derek Ansley. He's come up in this coaching tree that Brandon Staley loves to pick and choose from. So he's somebody that I think is definitely worth keeping an eye on. I'd be pretty surprised. Like I do expect Ansley to be the defensive coordinator. But the Houston defensive coordinator, I think is something worth keeping an eye on in terms of like maybe another role on the staff.
Yeah, it was Gerard Johnson who was interviewed for the offensive coordinator position. He didn't get that job, and he didn't get that same job elsewhere, but he was obviously fine with taking a quote unquote demotion or a lower on the totem pole opportunity as the quarterback's coach.
Yeah, he's the quarterback's coach in Houston.
Yeah, that's right.
So Soloman in the chat, he's a big Florida Gators fan and said that Doug Belk was a finalist for both the Ohio State and Florida DC jobs last year. So if you look at, like, I tweeted his job history, and ever since he got to the University of Houston, he's gotten a promotion like every single year. Like it was like safeties, and then it was like secondary coach, and then it was like co-defensive coordinator / safeties, and then it was like defensive coordinator / associate head coach. Like he's worked his way up like in a hurry at the University of Houston. So, and I think he's done some really good things. I mean, you look at the kind of players that they've produced from an NFL talent standpoint. I mean, like Peyton Turner and Logan Hall and which Jones was it that was also like the punt returner for the Patriots this year?
Oh, Marcus Jones.
That kind of stuff at Houston like wasn't really happening before him. So I do think he is a really interesting coaching candidate. And it wouldn't surprise me if like I said, Tommy Dontel just kind of stay doing what you're doing, and then Doug Belk becomes secondary coach and takes over Derek Ansley's spot.
Yeah, would love it.
So big shout out real quick to Taylor for the super sticker. Appreciate that. Appreciate
It's the
all you guys in
second
the
best
chat
way to
today.
spell that name. Good job.
Okay.
Tyler versus Taylor. Forget
Yeah.
it.
All right, so we're gonna dive into the Chargers pass rushers, like we did for the tight ends. Just kind of doing a review really quickly, maybe kind of discuss what exactly the Chargers might be needing at this point. So, obviously, everybody kind of there's been a lot of Joey Bosa dialogue on social media. A lot of it, I think, is kind of ridiculous at this point. The Chargers trading for Khalil Mack last year. The idea, obviously, is that you have these two elite pass rushers. Matt can be a true like sidekick for for Joey Bosa, or at the very least potentially even an equal to Joey Bosa. Joey only plays the 2 full games healthy, and then obviously tears his groin. So we really only got to see the Khalil Mack Joey Bosa pairing for the 2 full games at the start of the season, and it was friggin' awesome, man. Like the two pass rush performances against the Raiders and the Chiefs was amazing. I'm curious, I guess, what is the expectation heading into this offseason around those two in particular, as Joey's coming off of this year's injury? Khalil Mack's another year older, 2 very expensive players at this point as well. Where are you at with like the excitement level, I guess, around this pairing?
The excitement level. It's tough when you've seen what that pairing could look like, but then also be realistic with what actually did happen last season overall and where things are going. I think that this is the last year that we see Joey Bosa with the Chargers. I do think that they have to find that succession plan, whether it is cutting him or trading him eventually or whatever. I think they have to move on from, if it's not Joey Bosa, then it's Khalil Mack. They can't have both of those contracts on the books next year. And there's an out for it. Well, you could do it this year too with like Khalil Mack, but there's an out for both of those guys next season where you can save a ton of money. And I'm not saying that that's the way you should approach roster building. Like Telesco said, I'd rather have less cap and good players. But sometimes when you can save $50 million, $60 million from cutting 2 guys or moving on or whatever, not that I think they move on from both, but when you have opportunities like that, sometimes you might have to consider it when that quarterback contract starts kicking in, because at some point, like Herbert is no longer on this cheap contract. He's projected to get that extension this offseason, and at some point it's going to get too expensive. So I do think this is the year that they find the edge rusher that takes over for one of those guys. And I think if it's nobody, like if Staley is the coach next year, then I think that Mack would stay. I think if he's gone, then I think we kind of have like an entire blow up fire sale thing potentially happening here, unless one of those guys gets an extension or some sort of another restructure or something that makes them uncuttable or something more favorable next season. I think that they are going to go edge rusher the first 2 rounds, and I think they have to. And frankly, it's a smart thing. Even if I believe that those 2 edge rushers together are the greatest tandem in football today, like those 2 are going to be the best in the NFL if they're healthy, even if I believe that, and I think I could make an easy case for that, you can't believe that's going to happen. I was just looking at the difference between, going for a wide receiver, going for an edge rusher. The edge 3 and the edge 4, the last 3 seasons combined, has played almost 2,400 snaps because of various reasons. Someone gets hurt, because they needed them, because of rotation, whatever. 2,400 snaps. And even the wide receiver 3 and 4 combined, but they're at 2,700 snaps. And you almost always have a wide receiver 3 on the field. You have them a lot more than an edge 3. So, looking at the 2 snap counts, they've almost needed an edge 3 and 4 as much as a wide receiver 3 or 4. And you play wide receiver 3 typically a lot more. So I know people are worried about it being kind of a waste to take an edge rusher in round 1 or round 2 when they're not the quote unquote starter. But they play a lot of snaps in the last 3 seasons. I mean, last year, the edge 3 and 4 played 1,000 snaps. And I'm hoping that's not the case. Like, I technically don't ever want to see them on the field for this year. But they need to invest in that position. So I think one of these guys is gone next year. I think they're going to have a great season. I think one of them is gone next year. And I think they have to find someone in rounds 1 or 2 this year.
Yeah, that long-term outlook is kind of adds more frustration to the fact that they didn't add a pass rusher last year. At this point, like, how much better would we all feel at this point if the Chargers had, been able to kind of have a rookie flashing some things, Chris Rump flashing some things, obviously Kyle Van Noy, and then Khalil Mack, I think you feel a lot better about that situation versus like Derek Tuska and like not being able to play a fourth edge rusher at all. So that long-term outlook is frustrating because I think you look at this pairing individually and like you could talk about, the best pass rushing duo in the league. And I think a lot of people who listen to this show were making that argument at this time last year that, or not this time last year, I guess the trade didn't technically happen until mid-March, but, spent most of the summer arguing that this was going to be the best pass rush tandem in the league. And obviously that didn't come to fruition, but as long as these two players are on the field, I do expect them to play incredibly well. And like I said, there's been a lot of dialogue around Joey Bosa that I disagree with very strongly, because Joey Bosa, to me, from a film perspective, from a numbers perspective, is still absolutely a top 6-7 edge rusher in the league. Obviously, he hasn't been able to stay healthy. This pass injury was a freak accident, but he played every game except for one because of COVID in 2021. And then in 2020, he had a bunch of different other injuries, played every game in 2019. 2018 had a bunch of injuries. 2017 played in every game. So it's kind of like this alternating thing with Joey. So I guess the expectation should be that next year he plays most of the games, if not all of them.
Nice.
But this tandem, I think it's gonna work if they're on the field. But the fact that they have this tandem doesn't mean you stop investing in the pass rush. Like, I look at these teams who have made these strong postseason runs. Like we talked about this on the show. The Eagles traded for Robert Quinn, and he literally did not play for them. Like he played like a game and a half. He didn't even play in the Super Bowl. I think he played like 5 snaps. And same thing with like the 49ers. They drafted Drake Jackson in the 2nd round, and he was a healthy scratch for the back half of the season because they had so many other guys. Like I think in today's NFL, you need 3 high quality pass rushers with the emphasis of the passing game and the way that that's going, especially when you're playing in a division with Patrick Mahomes and the Sean Payton offense and maybe Aaron Rodgers in Las Vegas. Like you need high quality pass rushers. And if you head into this next season, with Joey and Khalil and then Chris Rumph again as edge 3, and maybe you take a 6th round rookie instead of a 1st or a 2nd round rookie, you're going to have the same problems that you did last year. You're not going to have a very good pass rush because those guys are going to get gassed. If any of them miss time, then you're back at it with Chris Rumph being a very important player for your team. So I agree. I definitely want to push back about this idea that drafting a pass rusher in the first 2 rounds is a mistake because he's not a starter. Well, yeah, like from a snaps breakdown perspective, an edge 3 is a starter. And this is a premium position. This is arguably the second most important position in NFL football with the way that everything is going right now. So, if you have a quality 3rd edge rusher, you're able to kick Joey Bosa inside. You can kick Khalil Mack inside, and you can really create some havoc. I think that's what defense is about, is creating mismatches, creating havoc. And if you just have 2 pass rushers, you're not able to do that at all.
No, not at all. I was having fun with this one. So 65% of the edge rushers in Brennan Thorne's, true sack rate for the top 43, they were taken in the first 2 rounds. If you look at the last 4 or 5 years of all-pro edge players, granted all-pro is a voting thing, but still, only 4 of the 22 were not 1st and 2nd round picks, and none of the ones that were first team all-pro were 2nd round or worse. They were all 1st round picks. So again, that doesn't mean that you can only find these guys in the 1st and 2nd round, but you are far more likely to find them early on. And I believe the likelihood, I'm trying to remember this from PFF Moo's article, but the likelihood of finding a starter at edge rusher in the 2nd round, there's a 20% difference between taking one in the 1st versus finding one in the 2nd, and then it continues significantly from there. It's much easier. I think there's like an 8 to 10% difference between the 1st and 2nd round to find a wide receiver in the 2nd or 3rd round and to be a starter or even a high-end starter than it is edge rusher. So I just I get wide receiver in the 1st round. I really, really do. And I'd be all for it. When we do a mock draft, that might be who I might take Jalen Hyatt until I die. But it doesn't mean that I think that people should be on this whole case that edge rusher in the first 2 rounds, or even just the 1st round, is a quote unquote bad idea. I think it's a very, very smart idea. And everything shows you find those good edge rushers, those elite edge rushers early on, not later.
Yeah, and I think like you're saying, like this is a double tandem thing. Like this helps 2023, and then also like if you are able to draft an edge rusher at 21, then they're able to become the guy, after next year,
Yeah.
after you're potentially moving on from Khalil Mack or Joey Bosa or potentially both of them. And if you're taking somebody in the fourth round, then next year in 2024, you have to take an edge rusher in the first round. Like there's like it creates more problems if you don't address edge rusher this year. To your point about Timu Risk article, this is from 2020. Is incredible stuff. Timu Risk going through the likelihoods of somebody becoming a stud at their position or a quality starter at their position, which PFF defines as 65th percentile or higher at every single position going through the whole round. So in terms of the pass rusher, the chances of you getting a starter in the first round are right around 60%, second round 42%, third round 30%, fourth round 24%. And this is, like I said, I think this is the second most important position in NFL football today with the way everything is going. So the chances of you getting a starter in the first round are significantly higher than if you wait until the third round or the fourth round. So I think that's just the way to go. So big shout out to Gavino Borges in the chat today, dropping his top 10 pass rushers there. Very curious to see how ours line up with his, but he did point this out earlier before we kind of got started about Brandon Staley's kind of patterns, if you will, that he typically really covets that length and that explosiveness. High vertical is one of the things that he is in particular is pointing out. So definitely something to keep in mind come draft time.
Yeah, I thank you for reminding me, Gavino, and I think whoever else reminded me in our Discord, because I forgot. But there's definitely that threshold. If you've got less than 33-inch arms, probably not taking you until day 3.
Yeah, if at all.
Right.
I think he would, prefer taking kind of a project swing on somebody with longer arms than,
sure,
a higher floor somebody who doesn't have that type of length that he's looking for. All right. Excited to see how this one works out. We're going to dive into our top 8, really, I guess top 9, like I keep saying, edge rushers. We'll have an honorable mention here. And Tyler, so I started off with I'm going to get rid of that banner actually.
Because it's tight ends.
Also that. My bad. But yeah, so I started off with the just missed last time. So why don't you kick us off there?
Okay. Let me get to the sheet. Okay, so just missed for me. So of some of the players that I even like Gavino mentioned or some people are looking for, I didn't grade Felix Anudike Uzoma. Sorry. I didn't grade Nick Hampton and I didn't grade Derek Hall. So, and the other 30 people that are in the draft. But, of those top guys, I didn't get to grading those guys. I got to 10. So if I don't have those guys, because I know it always happens, every chat goes, where's this guy? I didn't grade him. Sorry. So my just missed right now is Zach Harrison from Ohio State. I liked what I saw from Zach Harrison, and I think he's a good player to pair with Coach Ed, the pass rush specialist this offseason. Definitely more your 4-3 guys. He's not playing for the Chargers. He's rushing from a 3 or 4 point stance. Awesome first step. I think there are several instances where, on strip sacks, particularly where he shows plenty of bend. It actually almost surprises me because I feel like he's a one kind of rusher the most of the game. And then suddenly there's a strip sack, and I've seen like 2 or 3 of his strip sacks go for touchdowns. I don't know why, just pure variance, but he's had 6. He's had 6 forced fumbles the last 2 seasons, which is something the Chargers would like to look for. I don't think that he's the kind of player that they would draft to play, unless they have some sort of new change to how they're doing things. Plenty of pop in his hands, but I think that's kind of where the things stop, because tackles that could match that strength or anchor down a bit more, they would be able to absorb that pop. I mean, sometimes it would work. I forget which game it was. He popped someone, they're falling over, plenty of strength. But the guys that could match, or the guys that were able to anchor down, were able to, for lack of a better word, hold him no problem or knock him down. So he's got to learn ways to disengage or set something else up more than just that outside speed to power. I mean, again, sometimes there was a bend for that strip sack. It was just very few and far between. So not that what he does, can't work, and he has those strip sacks off the edge, but he's got to learn to work the hands and the wrists and develop those counters. So, again, a lot of upstairs pop, can shock, can work, but I don't think there was enough brought to it. And the guys that, the linemen that were great at anchoring down and doing more and doing something after the initial contact were able to handle him pretty considerably.
Yeah, I'm a fan of his. If the Chargers do necessarily want to wait again, I don't think he fits really what they want from a physical profile standpoint. But if they kind of are in desperation mode in the third round, then I think he's somebody that would make a lot of sense for me. He's my second lowest graded right now for me. I have graded. I've done 12 edge rushers, including Derek Hall. So Derek Hall is my lowest grade right now for Auburn, but he has a third round grade for me. So these are quality players. This isn't like we're getting to these players and we just like don't like them at all. Like I think Zach Harrison is a quality prospect. I just couldn't get there for like top 9. So I agree with a lot of what you said. I from a physical profile standpoint, I was like, okay, maybe this is somebody that you can see from like an inside outside flex. I want to see him against some guards, maybe kind of kick inside on obvious passing downs, but for how big he is, he wasn't super powerful against guards. And so I think that was kind of something that I ended up knocking him for. So good player, third round player, I think for me. And again, I think he's more of a 4-3 big end kind of player. Like if Gus Bradley, we're still around for the Chargers, I think he would be perfect. So I agree. I like the player, just not for the Chargers. All right. So mine is going to be somebody that you did not grade. It's Felix Anudike Uzama. And something that we kind of talked about last time was like the discount versions of players, right? And I think for me, like Felix Anudike Uzama is kind of the discount version of Myles Murphy. I think he has a lot of the same similar traits in terms of explosiveness off of the jump, in terms of his length, in terms of his power, and just like his sheer effort, man, was so impressive to me. And
nice.
There's a rep that I watched against Oklahoma State where he gets chipped from the running back, still is able to just bend around the corner and then go sack the quarterback, and it was just like all effort. And it was kind of a longer developing play from Oklahoma State, but a lot of his production is just like sheer effort. And in that same game against Oklahoma State, they did a jet motion towards his side, and he kind of took that jet motion guy as the outside rusher for Kansas State. And then Oklahoma State did misdirection screen to the other side. And Felix Anudike Uzama sprinted all the way across to the other side and ended up chasing down the running back that got the screen and covered so much ground in a hurry on that particular play. So the effort, the length, it's outstanding for him. It's just, he's a little inconsistent with his pass rush. A lot of these guys do not have, super developed pass rush arsenals, but I think somebody in the second round that would be a really good fit for the Chargers. He does have that length and explosiveness that I think Brandon Staley is looking for. So I think he is somebody that Chargers fans should be familiarizing themselves with, because to me, he's one of the younger guys in this class. Like some of these guys that we're going to be talking about are fifth year seniors. He's a true junior. Like I think he just barely turned 21. So he's got a lot of room to grow. And, I think that is something that kind of stands out amongst this class.
Okay. Yeah. I'll have to check him out. Just missed him.
Yeah. All right. So I teased him earlier. The most difficult prospect for me that I've watched and graded is Lucas Van Ness. I have no idea what to make of him. You look at his pass rush productivity on a stat sheet, and it looks really good. It does. I think he's, his composite ranking that we have compiled, it's in good standing from a pass rush productivity standpoint. But when you really start to dive into his film, the majority of his pass rush productivity is him as a looper, him as a stunt man, free rushers at some points. Like I charted 3 games for him, and I think I counted maybe like 3 actual like one-on-one wins. And this is a guy who has never been a starter for Iowa. He's only taken 980 career snaps. Like he is so green, man.
Yeah.
Like I don't know what to do with him. So ultimately what I decided to do with him was I gave him a slightly lesser grade than I gave Trayvon Walker last year. like
Okay.
didn't necessarily love. I
Yeah.
gave Trayvon Walker like a 6.55. I think I gave Lucas Van Ness a 6.5 even.
Barely made the second round,
Barely
huh?
making a second round grade for
Mhm.
me, and he's number 8 on my list. So again, just such a puzzling case for me. I couldn't necessarily like crack like what does he do well
Yeah.
outside of just be like bigger and stronger than guys.
Mhm.
So I think there's a lot of traits there. You know, he's working with Coach Ed as well, so I know that he's going to be
Yes.
putting in work. But right now, like I think he is a year away from being a year away, and that scares me from talking about like a potential first round pick. So I think his traits are good enough to merit a top 10 selection in terms of the position.
Mhm.
But if I were picking like numbers, like if I were the Seattle Seahawks, for example, and I'm looking at this edge rusher class, like there's no way I'm taking Lucas Van Ness at that spot. Like some of these other, draft analysts are kind of projecting, like I'm going in much in different directions. So
Mhm.
I like the traits, the production, lack of thereof really scares me, and the tape scares
Yeah.
me. But I think the traits are fantastic.
Yeah, this is the one. I think this is the first guy that I watched at the Edge group, and I messaged basically everyone I could think of. Like, what did I miss? Because
Yeah.
because I think Daniel Jeremiah had him going like 6th or 7th. Maybe it was Dane Brugler had him going like top 7
Dane
to
loves
the
him. Dane
Falcons.
loves Lucas Van Ness, and he's been on Lucas Van Ness since like October.
Yeah, and listen, I mean, if he likes him, and Daniel Jeremiah says this is a name that you should keep an eye on because his stock is going to rise. People talk about him more, during this pre-draft process. You have to take note. And then him working with Coach Ed obviously is big for him. I think we're going to see a better player than we did in college.
100%.
But we also didn't see a whole lot of that player.
Right.
And I'm watching the film going, did he change numbers? I'm watching the first 10 snaps of an Iowa game going, wait, what number is he again? And I realized that he didn't start.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is Ben Fennell's review of him. I don't know if Van Ness has any pass rush moves. He just goes and often right down the middle of the offensive line. And yeah, it often works once he develops some pass rush plan, hand usage, stutter setups to work half man and get on the edges of offensive line. He's going to be very hard to stop. Okay, but like read that for a player that's supposed to go
That's
top
like
10.
You're like 3 steps removed from
Yes. Like I don't know if he has any pass rush moves, but if he just figures out a pass rush plan, how to use his hands, how to do stutters, how to do setups, how to work half man, and how to work the edge, he's going to be hard to stop. Yeah, I mean, me too. If I worked on those things, I'd be very hard to stop too. But like, no one's taking me 7th overall. I was so confused watching this, and I don't want to feel like make it seem like I'm shitting on this player. Second round grade. There's a lot of things that he does well. He's very powerful. If you want like the guy who's going to plow over other guys, there's actually several guys in this draft that can do that. Very strong player, very powerful player. You do see where he could go. But boy, you better have the right coaching staff. You better be able to develop this defensive lineman because I worry. And, the thing that bugged me the most is not that stats matter, but the film matched the stats, was 314th in run stop rate in college football last season among like the 20%, threshold cutoff. 314th. I just like, what am I supposed to do with that? And he's getting top 10 buzz. And I feel so bad for feeling like I'm saying bad things about him. He's going to be better. He's working with a great pass rush coach. Yeah. He's got so much potential. He's so strong, but he's got such a long way to go. And I can't think of another prospect who's been this guy has this far to go, but he's going to go top 10. Yeah. And guys love him. And if he were end of the first round and guys are like, I love this player, but he's going 20 to 32 because of his raw talent, sure, I totally get it. But this to me is like Walker went first overall, but this is far more puzzling to me than Travon Walker, in my honest opinion.
Yeah, because Walker, you saw him do like truly freakish things from an athletic standpoint on tape. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was covering tight ends in certain games. Like I'm pretty sure he like matched a coverage against Kyle Pitts back in 2020. And then he's also just a bull in a china shop as a run defender. Like I wasn't crazy about, the hype around Trayvon Walker, but I really liked the player. I would have been comfortable taking him, the back end of the first round. And, if you're a team, like the Falcons, for example, they've been linked to a pass rusher they don't have any other pass rushers. That like their best pass rusher right now is probably Arnold Ebiketie, who they took last year,
Mhm.
who had like 28 pressures. Like if you're the Falcons and you're drafting Lucas Van Ness as your edge one right away, that
Mm.
terrifies me.
Mhm.
If you're the Chargers at 21 and he's there, I understand that because you have Joey and you have Khalil. You have no pressure to get immediate production from Lucas Van Ness. But
Mhm.
it's I I scratched my head. I didn't know what to do with him, and I ended up putting him in my top 8 because I think the traits are outstanding.
Yes.
Um, and there is a lot to like there, and he's doing the right things in terms of training with Coach Ed, but
Mhm.
I struggle with this one. So kind of moving on here, I'll finish my section here. I have Keon White
Mhm.
at number 7. That's Georgia Tech. I'm just going to put Jaw Tech. And then number 6 is somebody I'm really, really high on, and that is Will McDonald from Iowa State.
Mm. Man, I'm trying to look at mine, this thing, StreamYard, my notes. Okay. I don't want to. Should I put my guys and then we'll talk about it? Or
Yeah, go ahead. You put
okay.
yours, and then we'll figure it out.
Okay. So number 8, I have. Wait, that's not right. Oh, that's right, because I changed it on this other thing. Okay. Number 8, I have Keon White.
Nice.
I'm just put GT. At number 7, I have Lucas Van Ness from Iowa. And at number 6, I do have Will McDonald as well.
Hey, this is just like the tight ends again.
Oh God, do we have the same list? This sucks. Wait, oh my gosh. All right, whatever. I mean, you and I we find ways to get pretty similar until we get to like running backs and wide receivers. But
yeah, we'll be very different on receivers and running backs, and if we did quarterbacks, we'd probably be very different there too. But in terms of trench players and like by extension tight ends, I feel like we see things very similarly. What did you like?
Because I have the same experience as you do in the trenches.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which is so funny to me. But let's talk about Will McDonald, because I do think that you want to talk about length and explosiveness. I do think he fits exactly what the Chargers are looking for. What did you like about Will McDonald?
Yeah, so I started watching. I try to watch, if I can, 1 or 2 2021 games just to get like an idea of where they started. And watching 2021, this guy had no, at least the game that I watched, he didn't have a prayer against the run. And you see some potential with his frame, with his rush. It's like, okay, like, hopefully this guy could figure it out in 2022. Turn on that first game of 2022, stacking and shedding far better than he did the previous year. Granted, I only watched 1 game. Just more stout, more sturdy, and I love that. If you can just show me that this player has either learned or has grown, has developed, whatever, like that's awesome heading into, the next year where he could be, let's say with the Chargers, for example, and continuing to grow from there. I love seeing a player. I don't think he's by any means hit his peak. So just seeing an ascending player in a specific weakness is really, really awesome. And apparently he, dominated the Senior Bowl. He's got that ideal length that, well, not ideal. He's got more than ideal length at 35-inch arms. Or 35-inch wingspan or whatever. No, 35-inch arms, 80-something inch wingspan.
Yeah.
And I just think that he's able to do so many things that he just maybe didn't get the chance to show as much. I'm surprised they reduced him inside as much as he did, as much as they had him do. I don't know if that's just something they do at Iowa State. Very different player. This is a D tackle, but like Ioma Uwazurike was all over the defensive line. And I think just, being able to show that you can do those different things is fantastic. But when he can just be that traditional, edge rusher and be an edge rusher, not reducing inside is great. But when he can just show off his bend and show off that length, I think he's fantastic. He's even got a spin move sometimes to a detriment. I've seen him try to do a spin move, and the offensive tackle is just like I don't know what this is.
Yeah.
There are moments where I think I hate to call them Chris Rumph red flags, but when I see the player just consistently get like knocked over, I'm like, that reminds me of Chris Rumph in college, I should say. But again, he improved a ton in 2022. He's got enough of a rip and bend there. He's improved quite a bit against the run. He's got that length. You can just see where he ends up being an edge. Okay, edge one seems rich, but like you could see where that ends up happening as a guy who can go in the first round, develop, keep those traits going, and end up being an edge one. But I think right away you have a guy that's going to be a nice solid edge two if he continues his ascension between where he left college and then the first game of the season.
Yeah, I'm glad you highlighted just kind of his journey at Iowa State. He actually started his career at Iowa State as an off-ball linebacker. That's what he was doing in 2020, was playing off the ball, dropping into coverage and things like that. Because Iowa State runs the worst fucking defense in football history. I hate the 3-3-5 Big 12 bullshit. It drives me so insane. And I had to watch so much of it already in this class because Kansas State runs that same shit too. You know, so you're talking about a player who's like played off ball linebacker, who's like kicking inside at times. You know, he never truly had like that's like, you know, like rushing with a 5-man front or frankly a 4-man front all that much. So the spacing was never just ideal from him. So when you're a 3-3-5 defensive end, you have to get so creative with your pass rush. And I think that's something that, you know, again, probably doesn't help the production, but it helps his, you know, projection for the NFL because he is one of the few guys who has some counter. So I think like, you know, I watched 2021 too, and you see a lot of long arm stab, a lot of, you know, speed to power. But then you look at this year and he's got an inside outside rush to go back inside. He's got, you know, the spin move. He's got a cross chop a couple of times. So he's one of the more refined pass rushers at this point. And then you combine the length, the explosiveness. And I think he would check a lot of boxes for what the Chargers and Brandon Staley have historically looked for. The school, I'm not super sure about because Brandon Staley has really prioritized like Big Ten SEC school players.
Right.
And, you know, if you're like stacking this up with the guys who I have just ahead of Will McDonald, you know, the 2 SEC rushers versus him at Iowa State, but then also Will McDonald stood out at the Senior Bowl, like you said, and that's something that Tom Telesco has really put a ton of value in. So I think he fits a lot of what the Chargers would want for an edge rusher. I think for me, he probably has kind of like an Uchenna Nwosu kind of ceiling as a really solid number 2 rusher for you down the line. 21 feels a little rich for me, but I would understand what the vision is if you draft him at 21. Ideally, if you're aiming for Will McDonald, I think you probably would want to trade down a few spots, take him, you know, 26, 27, 28. And I think you would feel better about that situation. But I really like the player. I think there's a ton of great things there in store for him once he's able to get into, you know, an NFL training system and NFL spacing and be able to have like not have to worry about, hey, is this guard just going to come clock me at any moment and actually have like true one-on-one opportunities? Because something I wrote down is like anytime that he did have a true one-on-one matchup, I felt like he won it. Like I charted a lot of wins for him. And I think that stands out in this class because there's a lot of, you know, projection in terms of, you know, like pass rush arsenal, but Will McDonald can get it done. He can come in as a situational pass rusher as a rookie and truly make an impact in this class. And I think that is something that kind of sets him apart.
Yeah, I would agree. And just looking at these guys that we have written down and who we're going to have on our lists, I assume we're pretty similar there, or at least the same 1 through 5 in some order. I think Will McDonald is closer to 5 and 4 than he is like 7 and 8 on this.
I agree.
We have it broken up just because that's how we're breaking down the edge rushers, but I think he's definitely more in that like 5 to 4 range than 7 to 8.
Yeah, I think for me he's closer to number 5 than number 7 for sure.
Yeah.
All right, Tyler, you go next here. Let's get your 5 through 3, and then we'll discuss that as well.
Okay. So number 5, I have. Wait, hold on.
I know I have to keep going back and forth on my grades and the live sheet too.
Okay. At number 5, I have BJ Ojolari. Ojolari from LSU. At number 4, I have Nolan Smith from Georgia. And at number 3, I guess my first, my guy of the draft, Miles. Don't play like Miley. Miles Murphy from Clemson. Okay. Where do I start with this group? Because there's so many guys I want to talk about. I guess I know Miles Murphy's my guy, but I do want to talk about Nolan Smith just because I do think, despite the exchange that I had on Twitter with his position's rush specialist, who thinks he's going in the top 10, I don't think Nolan Smith is going to go in the top 10. But he's number 4 ahead of Ojolari, I think, as more of a projection than where he is right now. But that is kind of the point of the process because, you know, you're trying to project to where they, you know, could be. And I think he's over Ojolari, even though I think Ojolari maybe is slightly better right now. If you're talking about right now, like what he can do really well, I think he's one of the most well-coached run defenders from one of the most well-coached run defenses. I mean, the defense, you look at Georgia, and everyone's coached phenomenally, and no exception with him as well. Of the guys on this list, he was first in run stop rate and first in average depth of tackle of the top 15 that I just had ranked. His average depth of tackle is 0.3 yards from the line of scrimmage, which is always good to see.
Pretty good.
Yeah, no, that's pretty good. And I think his discipline, both on something like an option play where he's able to shuffle and close, outstanding. Apparently, he's going to test through the roof, and I just think he shows that in general with his range on like the backside chase downs. I think Ojulari and Smith are both two of those guys that are just guys who are phenomenal at those backside chase downs, and that's something that I do like to see for guys. That kind of goes into like both motor and just like a general character thing for me. If the play is not going towards you, do you watch it just go the other direction, or do you go try to make a play? And I think 5'4" and Murphy as well, all these guys, I guess, like they do have that. And against pulling tight ends, against pulling guards, I think he's got tons of power to halt their momentum and not get washed out. So I think against the run, very solid. As a pass rusher, I think most of it comes down to that motor and effort, and trying to work the wrists and the hands. And he can also just rush from different points. A lot of cleanup work, where he loses me as like a potential, again, like a top 10 draft pick guy. I don't buy that. It's both the bend and the counters, because I think there's just a lot left to be desired. I'm saying this as someone who's like a number 4 guy on my list, but again, it's the projection. If he were to have that bend and have those counters, he would move into that A grade, first round grade for me. But to me, he falls closer to someone like an Arnold Ebiketie in grade, who I loved, but that's a guy you take like 20 to 30, early 30s, and it does have to matter. I think that he did miss the remainder of the season with a pectoral injury. Granted, he's fine. Like he seems to be okay. But I just have him high because I think of all things of how well he was coached against the run. And it really just comes down to his work with Coach Ed, which I think for those who don't know, we keep saying that name. He worked with everyone from, Aiden Hutchinson to Otito Ogbonia last year.
Kwity
Paye. And of course, Sebastian Joseph Day, Morgan Fox, these guys. So if the thing that you're missing, if you're already really good against the run and you're a very freak athlete, if the thing you're missing is a stronger array of pass rush moves and you're working with Coach Ed this offseason, I think you're just going to walk into the NFL a lot better than we saw you last. So it's a bit of a projection, but I think he's really their strongest. If I had to bet on who the Chargers would take at edge rusher at 21, I would think, because of where he would go and the fit and everything, that it would be Nolan Smith.
Yeah, I'm glad you're highlighting him, because I do think I agree with that statement. I mean, we are talking about University of Georgia pass rusher who's really freaking good, and Brandon Staley loves him some Georgia football. So I really love Nolan Smith, man. Like I think he was one of the first players that I watched. I think he's one of my guys for sure for me.
Nice.
Nate Tice uses this term a lot on defensive ends, defensive tackles, linebackers, banshees. These guys who play with like their hair on fire and just come at you every single play. That's Nolan Smith for me. Like one of my like favorite NFL watches, even though he plays for the Chiefs, is Nick Bolton. Like Nick Bolton just comes at you every single play. And if you want the pass rusher version of Nick Bolton, that's Nolan Smith for me. Like he is going to make sure that every rep that he takes is going to be like, if you're trying to block me, you're going to have to work your ass off every single play to block me. And you watch his tape against, for me, like the Oregon game is really good. I think it was Mississippi State for me that really was like, oh my gosh, this guy's just incredible at just like all of the effort stuff. And his size is a little concerning. I think he's only listed at like 235 pounds or something like that. So you're not going to want to like have him straight up holding the edge. You're not going to kick him inside. Like he is a strict outside linebacker type 3-4 defense who is going to get after the passer, who's going to get after the running backs and make a strong impact right away from just an energy and a culture standpoint. So, I flirted with the idea of like giving him a first round grade, but the lack of size, I think, does kind of merit it being a high second round grade. But I love Nolan Smith, man. Like the pass rush arsenal is basically non-existent at this point, which is really the difference between him and Ojulari, in my opinion.
Yes.
But there's a ton to like about Nolan Smith. And I think you bring him into this situation with the Chargers specifically, learn from Khalil Mack, learn from Joey Bosa, keep working with Coach Ed, and you can really have this ball of clay essentially coming in and making a strong impact as a run defender, making a strong impact as a situational pass rusher. And he's never going to get double teamed with the Chargers. Like that's something that it would work in the favor of a lot of these guys. But
Sure.
I think you want more Banshees in the front seven. I think Nolan Smith is your guy.
Yeah, I would agree. I actually have Ojulari as a higher graded player, but I think Nolan Smith just where I'm hoping he ends up with the help that he's getting this offseason. Not that Ojulari won't improve himself, but I just have Nolan Smith a bit higher just because I think that it's where I think he'll end up. But I do have Ojulari graded higher, just not ranked higher. Oh, wow, look at that.
So just flip 5 and 4 for us, but Ojulari is another one that I think would really fit for what the Chargers are looking for. I think he's not as Banshee type, but he certainly does a lot of the same kind of things. But to me, Ojulari is the most refined pass rusher in this class, not named Tyree Wilson. I think BJ Ojulari has a ghost move, which as a true junior is insane to me. Like he's out here trying Von Miller go-to move stuff, and that's just not what you see typically in college football. So he can cross chop, he can do all the advanced pass rush stuff. He's able to spin move, he's able to inside outside rush. Similar to Smith, he's not as big as I would like. I think he does have to add some mass, particularly against the run. Smith is an elite gap shooter. Yeah. Ojulari's not that. Like Ojulari's not going to be as strong of a run defender, but he'll do all of the effort stuff like you mentioned. But for me, it's just like the pass rush arsenal for him is already there.
Yeah.
And I think you could, definitely see him having an Uchenna Nwosu rookie kind of season. The highlights, of course, where he's able to give you, 25 pressures right away. Like I think him with the Chargers will be a fantastic situation. And I think, he is exactly what the Chargers need at this point. Like they need somebody to come in who can handle their business as a secondary pass rusher. And I'm a big fan of his, not as much as Nolan Smith. Like I think Nolan Smith, just like from a sheer effort standpoint, is able to separate himself. But Ojulari as a pass rush specialist would be really nice to see as well.
Yeah, it's not pick your poison, but I do think Ojulari is the better pass rusher right now, both in terms of bend and what he can do. So no question about that there. Again, it's more against the run for me, but I just don't think that's something you need to rely on him right now if you're the Chargers. Not that we're ranking them again. They're not ranking them based on their fit with the Chargers, but just considering if the Chargers took him at 21 or traded back and took him, like you do not have to rely on him to be that guy right now. And the way I always approach it is if you have one very effective, unique pass rush move that you're really good at and you can do it significantly and effectively and frequently, that means you can learn more. Like if you can do, and especially if you do that, right? If you can do the ghost, then you're good. So if you can do that, then you can keep improving from there. And even if you don't think the rest of it is as strong, and I do think he does have more than that, but if you can do something like that, you can keep improving and keep ascending. So I think that in terms of pass rush, and I haven't graded it as such, like he does have a higher starting point and arguably a higher ceiling than someone like Nolan Smith.
Yeah, outside of the top two, like he's the only rusher with like a really well-defined pass rush plan at this point in his career. And I think that'll earn him some points. I think he's somebody that is being a little slept on. Like I consistently see him, going in mock drafts in like the late 40s, early 50s. And from a Chargers perspective, like I would love that, if they were able to get him in the second round, that'd be fantastic. But to me, I think he's absolutely a first round player, and I'm a big fan of him. And just like, you don't see college pass rushers doing ghost moves. Like I said, like he's got some rare arsenal stuff for somebody who's not that well defined. And I think like, the LSU number 18 thing is kind of overrated at this point, but I think it does show a lot of who he is like off the field and in that locker room that he was able to get that as a pass rusher. Somebody that's a good culture setter for sure. And same thing with Nolan Smith. Nolan Smith was the captain, reportedly was like essentially a position coach when he was injured with the pectoral injury for Georgia down the stretch. So either of those guys, I think are absolutely somebody that would be in play for the Chargers. All right, let's talk about. I don't necessarily want to talk a ton about Tyree Wilson and Will Anderson, and I think we can.
Are they 2-1?
Yeah, they're 2-1. Tyree's number 2 for me, and Will Anderson's number 1. I think that it's an interesting thing that Dan and Jeremiah brought up of like maybe Tyree Wilson before, and we can talk about that. But me and you messaged the other night about Myles Murphy, and it is a work in progress for sure in some aspects, but he's another Banshee, man. Like he plays with his hair on fire all the time, and I think like he's just able to just like will his way to production in
Mhm.
ways that not many other pass rushers in this class can do. So Miles Murphy, I think I would understand why you would be so high on him and call him a my guy.
Yeah, it's so interesting because if I am trying to explain based on something quantifiable what it is, I really can't because he's not like a developed pass rusher.
Hmm.
And if you look at the stats, it's not like he's up there with someone like Tyree Wilson or Will Anderson. And like, I don't care because I don't know how to explain it because it's weird. He's not even the kind of player that I would like during the pre-draft process normally. I love more my Ebiketis and Nick Bonitos and guys that like are bendy and more twitchy.
Same,
That's not really Miles Murphy
same.
for the most part, but it's just the vibe, man. I don't Musgrave was a vibe guy and he was tight end 3. Miles Murphy is just a vibe. It's the motor, it's the burst, it's the pop. It's just the NFL freight train strength. Like, and you can see him. If he didn't have this, I wouldn't put him in the top 3. But he can win outside with that dip and rip. The bend isn't like
Yeah.
great, but he can do that. And you can definitely reduce him inside, and he holds up too. He just needs to become a more complete pass rusher, obviously. And that's most of these guys. I feel like last class was not as great against the run, but most of them had more of a pass rush plan, at least in that like top 7 or 8 range or so. This class, I think, has more to work on as a pass rusher, but I think that he can do a bit more day one because of their work against the run. And I don't know, man, watching Miles Murphy, again, the numbers don't even back this up, which is so against what I would do. But just watching him and like, unless it's Will Anderson or Tyree Wilson, but like of all these guys, if you had to tell me one person you'd love to coach, I can't coach him, but if I could, like it would be him. Like imagine him as any athlete in some sport that you've coached that you like just the vibe of watching him and what he's able to do and all the traits and the things that he can do. If it's all, don't focus on what he can't do. Focus on what he can do. And this is now, you could say that's the same thing for Lucas Van Ness, but the difference for me is I see more wins as a rusher. I see more bend on the outside. I see so much more against the run than someone like a Lucas Van Ness. So, he's a day one run defender at several spots in the line. I think the combination of what he can do is exceptional. You just got to get him to do it consistently and better.
Yeah, I think you look at some of these other guys, Keon White, Lucas Van Ness, like they show flashes of power. Miles Murphy is powerful, like full stop, every single play. Like he's gonna anchor down and he's gonna make you work for it. Like you're not gonna move him off the ball with the one-on-one blocking coverage. And like there were so many times where I watched him just like destroy tight ends. Like you watch his game against Clemson this past year. They kept on trying to throw like the double tight end double team at him, and it was not working, man. Like he's just throwing dudes aside. And so I think he's probably gone well before the Chargers, right? But like you want to talk about like having a balance and like getting him behind Khalil Mack to work with, like, if Chris Rumph ever hits, like you have the speed and the bend over there, and then Miles Murphy, you get the power rusher. I think like that's kind of what Brandon Staley has typically wanted. But Miles Murphy is another guy, like when he's able to kick inside, he's actually excelling and beating guards.
Yes.
Like that's not something that a lot of these other guys can do. So, one of the things, this is very different, right? But one of the things that I loved about Jamari Sawyer is that like he could do a one-arm stab against somebody and completely knock you off the ball. Miles Murphy has that same kind of ability. So he'll do a long arm stab, and that offensive tackle is going to go like lose his leverage instantly. It happened all the time when I was watching him. So I'm with you. I typically don't like love the power rushers, but because it's so much harder for them to like get going in the NFL as opposed to somebody who's like really bendy and twitchy. But Miles Murphy is that guy right now. And Thomas Martinez, like every single snap, he's just going hard. And I'm not comparing him to Max Crosby, but like some of his production, like just reminded me.
I don't hate that. I understand what you mean.
Some of Max Crosby's like early rookie season production is just Max Crosby just working his ass off to split a double team and like go chase a quarterback down. That's Miles Murphy. Like that's exactly what he does half the time. And he's just going to keep going nonstop every single play. and the power, the effort. I think it's a lot of stuff to like for him. Obviously, you would love to have more production. He was definitely more productive as a sophomore, but he's another guy. Like he just barely turned 21. Tyree Wilson is gonna turn 23 in May, I think. Nolan Smith is an older player. Will McDonald's older. Keon White's older. Miles Murphy is just barely going to turn 21. Like, he has so much room to grow. I think there's so much to like there. If he fell to the Chargers at 21, I would be so happy.
Yeah. And okay. I don't see it happening. He's definitely not the first two off the board. I guess if Lucas Van Ness does have the legitimate buzz, which it sounds like he does, if we're expecting not number 1 overall, but the same kind of ascension that Travon Walker had, and then let's say someone would prefer a more, stand-up, twitchy kind of guy like Smith or Ojulari, I don't think he gets to 21. But if Telesco decided to do what I've said he shouldn't do and trade up for Miles Murphy, I'd get it. Supposed to do. At least it's a pass rusher. It's not a linebacker or a running back. You go get.
At least it's a premium position.
Yes. Oh, just for some fun things. The Broncos spent today interviewing Matt Patricia for defensive coordinator. So,
dude, the Sean Payton stuff makes no sense to me. Nobody else wanted to hire him, and he's interviewing Rex Ryan and Matt Patricia as his defensive coordinators. I don't understand.
I need it. I need it to be Rex Ryan, but story for another time.
Yeah, absolutely. So, big Miles Murphy fans on this show. I agree with you. I think the interesting thing in terms of the pass rushers is like this is perceived as such a deep class, and it is. I mean, Felix Enrique-Uzama has as a second round grade for me, and he's number 9. Like, that's just not typically the case when you get to pass rushers because the drop off is so steep usually. So it is going to be interesting. Like, there's always these dynamics, right? Of like, there are 2 deep positions on defense. Cornerback, I think, is another class that's really deep. Edge rusher is really deep. So like, what position gets the run first, and how does that affect things? Because like, there's a lot of love for Devon Witherspoon, the corner from Illinois, and Christian Gonzalez from Oregon, and Keely Ringo from Georgia. So like, how does that balance itself out this year? And maybe one of these guys do drop to the Chargers. Maybe Miles Murphy is there. So gonna be interesting that way. Didn't really get to talk about Tyree Wilson or Will Anderson. 2 fantastic players. Tyree Wilson to me is like if Greg Rousseau were like elite right away, like just length and burst off of the ball. Like, he shouldn't do the things that he does, but he just closes the gaps in the fastest amount of time that I can recall. So 2 elite rushers for me. I think, I was talking about this on Twitter the other day. I think of the last 3 classes, because 2020 had Chase Young. Like, I think he was kind of a unicorn for me. But of like the last 3 classes, I think you could really argue that Will Anderson and Tyree Wilson are the 2 best edge rusher prospects.
Yeah, and I would have to look back at where I had Hutchinson. I didn't do the draft rankings with Chase Young. Who the heck was the edge rusher in 2021? Who was in that class?
Let me look. I had this up the other day.
Oh, Micah Parsons.
Yeah, I didn't grade him.
I'll have to recall. I have to go back and look.
I'm looking right now.
Probably had Hutchinson over Tyree Wilson. Will Anderson, I don't know.
That was Jalen Phillips, Azeez Ojulari for me. Those are the 2. That was my 1 and 2.
Yeah, no, I think that some of those guys had better traits, maybe, but I wouldn't have had Jalen Phillips or Azeez over at least these 2 guys, and not over Hutchinson. Probably not over Thibodeau. But I'd have to look. Plus, things change. Like, the difference between what I'd looked at 2-3 years ago versus now is, I mean, I have a grading category that's just run defense. And so I just changed it to like, I don't know, run defense. So yeah, I don't mind it. Will Anderson, I turned on. I watched more than 1 game, but I turned on 1 game and I went, do I have to just watch any more? Like, I just kind of, I watched him like against double teams, like bend around double teams. I'm like, in the run game, and I'm like, what the hell is this? Phenomenal players for sure.
Yeah, I generally like hate player comparisons, but he's gotten a lot of like Khalil Mack comparisons, and And after watching Khalil Mack for the past 2 years, like I get it. Like I think that makes a lot of sense from a player comparison standpoint.
Mhm.
The debate of him versus Wilson is interesting to me. I with all things considered relatively equal, I would still lean the younger guy. Like Will Anderson is going to be 21, and like I said, Tyree Wilson's going to be 23. It took Tyree 5 years to have like his true breakout season, whereas Will Anderson probably should have won the Heisman in 2021.
Yeah.
So I think from a production and talent standpoint, we've known about Will Anderson longer.
Yeah.
I understand why someone would take Tyree first. Like this isn't an Aiden Hutchinson versus Trayvon Walker thing for me, or frankly, even like Kayvon Thibodeau versus Trayvon Walker.
Yeah.
Like I do think the gap between these two players is pretty small.
Yeah. Both have a first round grade for me. No surprise there. I only have 2 first round grades in this class, but Murphy probably bumps up by the time things are said and done.
Yeah, Murphy has a first round grade for me. Yeah, he's right at a 7 for me.
Okay. Cool.
So yeah, very fun class. I really hope the Chargers are able to take advantage of it. Really need them to do that this year. Would be cool with like I said, Ojulari, Smith, McDonald in the first round. I would totally understand that. I would probably put money on Nolan Smith being that guy if there is one, but gotta address the pass rush situation at some point in the first 2 rounds. All right, Tyler, any final thoughts today before we head out?
I hope they take an edge rusher just so my efforts the last 3 seasons have finally pay off.
Yeah. Just it makes too much sense to get a guy into this room learning from Khalil, learning from Joey Bosa, and just be able to be that long-term answer. So makes a ton of sense. So thank you everybody for tuning in live today. Appreciate you guys in the chat. If you are watching this, as always, make sure to like the video, subscribe, comment, let us know who your top 10 pass rushers are, top 8, 9, however you want to format it for us. If you're listening to this, make sure to leave us a rating or review. We do really appreciate all of that. It does sincerely help us continue to grow the show. So appreciate you guys. We'll see you next time. We're going to have Arjun on this upcoming weekend, and we're going to do kind of an early look at free agency. He's been doing some videos for us. He's been doing some tweets about contract breakdowns. So we'll get him on the show and see how really realistic it is to keep some of these upcoming free agents. So bit of a change of pace. We're going from draft stuff back to free agency this weekend with Arjun, and excited to dive into that with him. So we'll see you guys then.